I'm going to let them introduce themselves and them talk about it, but I swear this is fungi, mushrooms is one of the least developed, I think, aspects in organics. And I'm very excited to see it here. We've had Cotter come and talk in the past. He's out of Clemson. He's a great mycologist. So very exciting. Well, I'm going to sort of turn this over, and you may have to project a little bit, but you know.
No big deal.
So thank you all for coming.
Great.
Yep, you're on.
You're on. No, it's this one. Okay, it's working.
And this one works too, or no? I can use the handheld.
I can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
No.
Okay.
This one?
I think you'll have to do like the Tony thing and just project.
Just project it.
We could do that too. Hello. Good. Okay. Speak louder.
But just keep speaking.
Keep on speaking. It's good. We'll use that. Okay. You want to go?
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming today. There's still a few free spaces up here. If anybody wants to move forward, that would be great. My name is Joana Amorim. This is Michael Beck. And we're here today to share with you a little bit of our journey into outdoor mushroom inoculation. Yeah. Anything you want to say?
We're so happy to be here. This is amazing. Unfortunately, we can only be here for the presentation. We have to leave. There was a death in the family, so we have to leave afterwards. But we want to talk with as many people as possible. So, yeah, this is awesome. We're so happy to be here. Thanks for showing up.
Okay. So I want to start just with a little bit of a backstory of how we came to be. So I'm originally from Portugal and moved into the States 8 years ago. And we were searching for land all over the US to start like a regenerative landscape project. And we landed in Berea, Kentucky, just 9 miles south of Berea. We found 62 beautiful acres. And that's where it all started. We took it really slow. We started with no resources and built a traditional log cabin for about 5 years. We just moved into it a couple years back. And the intention to moving to the land was to have a more centered and more wholesome lifestyle. We knew we wanted to grow our own food and just learn with the old folks like how things used to be done. And part of our intention is to work in conservation with the local forest medicinals, and that including plants and mushrooms, and also to be a hub to educate the local community and give this space as an opportunity to share and learn together. All right, I'll pass it on.
Can everyone hear me, or should I use the microphone? Microphone? Okay. I'm just going to take this off. No, it's working now. It's working now. No? Yeah? I'll use both. So back in, one of the first things we did when we got the land was applied for a couple NRCS grants. One was on timber stand improvement, and the other one was on edge feathering. Essentially, these were ways that the NRCS saw that we could sort of start the regeneration process of the land after it had been logged. It had been partially clear cut. I think they took everything over 16 inches 20 years before we got it. So the NRCS agent went all over 11 or so acres, 13 acres of our forest, and marked a bunch of trees with blue spray paint. These were the ones we were to remove. And it actually told us a lot about the ecology of our forest. Most of the trees that he marked were American beech trees. And beech trees are a wonderful tree. They're all over our forest. They're the ones with the really, really smooth bark, and they're sort of an understory species. They've got delicious nuts, but essentially when the forest was partially cut, the beech trees came up, and I see them as sort of protectors of the forest. They have like 90-degree branches that just go straight out, and they cast a dense shade. So I think the goal was to open up some light in the forest. So I don't remember clearly if it was, I don't think it was before the NRCS grant that we knew we wanted to do mushrooms. I think we saw I think we asked ourselves the question, we're going to have all these trees that we're cutting down. A lot of them are perfect size diameter for mushroom growing. And I think it was shortly after we saw what the grant entailed that we decided to start a mushroom farm as sort of a piggyback on the grant. And it made a lot of sense. I mean, the NRCS was paying us to cut down trees. We decided to sort of use them for something good instead of, just letting them lay in the forest, or, I would imagine some people burn the wood that they cut. But we decided that growing mushrooms was the best course. So yeah, it was the year of 2017 where we sort of walked around the forest and cut down these trees. And then with a team of 5 people in November of 2017, we inoculated about 500 or 600 logs. It took all of 2 weeks with really full days. We didn't really take many breaks. And it was really fun to have a little fire with our wax setup and inoculate. And I think we stopped because it started to snow at the end of November. And that was how we started the mushroom farm. Since then, we've not done nearly that scale of inoculating. We host a couple workshops in the spring and a couple in the fall. And we're more interested in passing on this knowledge than we are at, sort of commercially growing mushrooms. So for that reason, we only inoculate 50 to 100 logs a year. It amounts to, 2 or 3 smallish trees. There was one more thing I wanted to mention. Just generally, growing outdoors, it's not a way to make a living. We saw that the overhead was low in starting the mushroom farm, and it paid itself off quickly, but the income that we've received for it has not been extensive. So it's a great addition to a farm if you already have a farm, or if you want to do a small scale sort of home growing scale mushroom growing. But yeah, it's not a great commercial option. Partly because it's so seasonal, right? The mushrooms only flush in spring and autumn, unless you're taking other measures to make them flush when you want them to. Did I forget anything? So, like Tony mentioned in introducing us, the mushroom world, it's really, I don't think humans know a lot about it. It is a kingdom, like plants, like animals. Mushrooms are its own kingdom, which in and of itself is pretty incredible. Humans have identified about 14, Humans have identified about 14,000 species of mushrooms out of 6 million, and 6 million estimated. So if you do the math on that, it means that humans have identified 0.02%, or on the other side of that, we haven't identified 99.98% of the estimated species that are out there. That gives you the kind of idea of how extensive this kingdom could be, how much potential it could have, and what we don't know potentially. Here are just to simplify, here are 4 basic categories of mushrooms. The mushrooms that we think of when we think of, like, the fruiting body of a mushroom that you might buy at the store, or when you think of the mushroom form, most of these are in the saprotroph category. These mushrooms eat wood and other substrate. They're sort of like, I woke up with an analogy in my head this morning that these saprotrophs are kind of like the vultures of the forest in fungi form. They accelerate decomposition by breaking down wood and other carbon. And these are, again, your more common mushrooms like oyster mushrooms, shiitake, chicken of the woods, turkey tails that you see all over in Kentucky here. And then the 2 categories opposite here are sort of opposites. There's parasites, which occupy a host and sort of accelerate the death of that host or cause harm. You might have heard of sort of the honey mushroom endemic out west. Lion's mane is a great mushroom that's also a parasite, as well as chaga. And then the opposite of the parasites, sort of for organization's sake, are mycorrhizal mushrooms. These pair with plants' roots and have a symbiotic relationship with these. So all plants, all trees need either an endo or an ectomycorrhiza, and these are a lot harder to grow and to cultivate. So your morels, truffles, chanterelles, these are humans haven't really found a great and effective way to grow these yet. And then there's sort of the obscure category of endophytes, which live within plant cells. I did a couple hours of research on endophytes, and it's like really hard to understand. It's pretty scientific. A lot of these are molds and yeasts, and they live inside plant cells, and they're sort of like parasites. They live within cells, and but the organism itself doesn't really know that they're living in it. The most popular example of this is penicillin, which, if used in a human body, it will attack a group of bacteria to our benefit, but we don't really know it's there. Categories. There is a bunch of other potential benefits of mushrooms, including mycoremediation. They're doing studies in oyster mushrooms on toxic waste sites. And they may be able to eat petroleum products. I think there's a good potential of fungi breaking down plastics in the future if it's not happening already. Lots of potential for mushrooms, and it's super fascinating to me.
Just one more thing about this slide. Today we're going to be demonstrating how to inoculate logs in a natural setting, outdoors, and these include the saprotrophs and the parasites only.
Great.
Okay, so some basics of growing fungi. Today we're going to be talking about only outdoors. Of course, there's also the indoor option. This is more viable for commercial production because you can time your production, and since you're dependent on the natural conditions of the environment, humidity and temperature. Obviously, indoors you're able to control that, so you can time your flushes and streamline your production so that you can have commercially viable crop. Outdoors, you're kind of at the mercy of the elements. When placing your log in your mushroom garden, you want to make sure you take in consideration shade. Logs with mushrooms do not love sunlight. The sun can accelerate the drying of the log, therefore drying out the starches and sugars, which is what the mushroom feeds on. So we want to make sure we place your logs in the shade. In our forest is mostly north facing, so that's pretty ideal. Also, Kentucky forests are really dense, so the sun penetration is already minimum. We have a really similar climate to a lot of the forests in Japan, where a lot of these mushrooms are native too. So it shows how great of a climate we have to grow these species. High humidity or watering, mushrooms are mostly water, so they need to have a high content of water in order to produce a mushroom. You can look at it as sort of like the flower of this organism. So you want to make sure you either have your log placed in a very humid place, or you can water your log if you don't have a lot of rainfall or not the ideal north-facing slope. Water is also a technique to force fruit your log. A lot of commercial mushroom farms have watering systems where they soak their logs in order to like force fruit the mushroom. So you can do it for 24 hours, and then within 5 to 12 days, you can expect a flush. You should wait about 8 weeks between flushes. But again, for this to be commercially viable, you need to have a lot of logs. You should really only force fruit your logs 3 times a year.
When watering, would you suggest using municipal water, or are you using river water or local well water? With the chlorine and everything in that water, would that kill the fungi?
It wouldn't kill the fungi, although I would suggest using either rainwater, or if you have a natural water source, that would be ideal. There is not a lot of information how the chlorine water would affect your logs, although I believe that you would in the long term, it would potentially affect your log. So another thing to take in consideration is ample amount of sugars and starches. This is pointing to the fact of when you harvest your wood, which we're going to talk about in the next slide. So there's a window where the optimal wood could be harvested, so you have a higher content of sugars, because that's what the mycelium feeds on. Minimal contamination risk points to the fact of not only site, but also the tools that you use. So making sure that you disinfect your tools before inoculating, that you keep your spawn in a sealed bag, because when you have spawn, it comes from a sterile environment, and it's really susceptible to contamination from other fungi. And in our forest, we have really strong mycelium that will take over very rapidly. For example, the turkey tail, it would definitely take over your mycelium or your spawn, and also your logs. So just keeping an eye on contamination. There's also a technique of plugging the holes after inoculation, and that's why you plug the holes to minimize that contamination factor. Fresh air and good ventilation is just a good preventative against molds and other fungus as well. So making sure that your logs are in a place where air can go through. And this image here is what is called a log tower. And this is a good way to ensure circulation between all the logs there. In substrate and indoors, obviously, controlled environment, temperature and humidity is a lot easier. Nowadays, they have really fancy computers that can do that for you. And then sterile substrate as well as the environment. So indoor is a lot easier to control all these factors. Outdoor, you're going to be at the mercy of the environment. So there's going to be a lot more risks and a lot more potential damage to your crop.
By indoor, do you mean like it could be in a greenhouse, or do you mean like in a separate building, or what?
It could be anywhere, as long as you have in consideration the light amounts and humidity. And to do it for commercial purposes, you need to have a sterile environment. So stainless steel walls, ceiling, and floor, so to be able to disinfect it.
Lots of people do suggest greenhouses when they're just thinking about growing things. But a greenhouse, it would actually be a really hard place to grow mushrooms in, because it's so full of light. Right? So really a garage or a basement is more amenable to growing mushrooms. Also, just a word on substrates. Obviously, like you saw, mushrooms love to grow on wood, but they'll also grow on a lot of other things, right? Mushrooms, certain species will grow in compost that's sterilized. certain species. Oyster especially is sort of a beginner's mushroom. That's what we'll be working with here today. They'll grow on straw. They'll grow on used clothing. It'll grow on pretty much anything if you provide the right environment for it to grow in. Yeah. Any questions? I did want to encourage people to ask questions at any point. We're not scientists. We've got quite a bit of experience growing, but we love contribution and any questions. So, yeah.
Have you guys had an issue with any mushrooms that weren't native to the area affecting other trees or the native mushrooms that might have been in the forest initially?
We have not experienced that, although we accidentally were able to grow shiitakes on a log that was not inoculated. So the spores from that one log landed in a different log, and then it was able to fruit and to establish on a different log, which is what we want. But we haven't seen a significant impact of these species in the local communities.
So they stay where you want them.
Yes.
For the most part, and it's a great question though, because I've heard a lot of people, especially more west of here, they don't have an abundance of turkey tails, but they want them. And I'm sure some people are considering or have inoculated with turkey tails, and it is something to be really careful about, because turkey tails are so opportunistic that, given the right environment, they do sort of take over. We're working with shiitake and reishi and the lion's mane, comb's tooth, and if those take over, it's kind of like, great, we're happy about that. But yeah, it's something to consider. Same with honey mushroom. They're super opportunistic, so we wouldn't want to inoculate honey mushrooms here with the risk of them sort of taking over the forest. There's sort of horror stories from out west of the honey mushroom. But great question.
You want to be careful about, especially the parasitic type of mushrooms, like honey mushrooms, because those would take over a forest and potentially kill a lot of the species here. But that's definitely a good consideration to have. Yeah.
All right. So now we're going to get into sort of the more technical aspects of how to grow your mushrooms on logs. This graphic, not this one, but this one over here, and the next graphic are from Field and Forest. They're sort of the best resource that we've found online when it comes to growing mushrooms. They're out of Wisconsin. They sell tools and spawn, and it's just a great website. They've got a bunch of educational resources like this up there. So as you'll see, there are better times and less better times to harvest logs in your forest when you choose to inoculate. We usually do a small inoculation and paired with the workshop in the fall and the spring. When you are looking for trees to choose to inoculate, you want to take healthy looking trees with no obvious fungi contamination. You don't want to have bark damage. It doesn't want to look diseased. And what we're usually looking for is trees with multiple leaders, or trees that are growing super, super close together. Usually we're looking for trees that are a diameter of about 4 inches to 8 inches, kind of like in this range. And that's just really for the ease of being able to move them around. You can inoculate trees that are much bigger, but they're going to be harder to deal with. Species, great. Yeah, we'll get to that in the next slide. Timing-wise, you'll see that sort of the winter, when the trees are dormant's the best time. It does get a little bit tricky in colder climates, because after you inoculate, you want about a 6-week period of temperatures not below freezing for like extended periods of time. If it gets below freezing a night here and there, that's fine, but you don't want a week of straight temperatures below freezing. So if you're looking at taking trees in the fall, you want to take them pretty much at full leaf color. And that's a really easy time to see, hey, it's time to take trees down for mushroom inoculation. And then if you're taking trees in the spring, you can cut them anytime during the winter and they'll sort of stay viable for inoculation as it gets warmer. We usually take ours in this climate mid-March to the end of March. But it really, honestly, it's just weather dependent. You know, there's sometimes that the leaves will turn colors in the beginning of October and sometimes at the end of October. So you kind of have to be a little bit of a meteorologist to do this. But when you do cut down the trees, they send out an antifungal response. And you want to wait for that period to pass. This is just a tendency of trees when they die. And that period lasts for between 10 days to 2 weeks. So what we do is we'll cut down a tree or a limb of a tree, and then we'll wait 10 days to 2 weeks, and then we'll cut it up into sections that we can move around and inoculate. You want to leave it whole. That just minimizes like the drying out process because trees dry from their ends. And as you're doing this, you just want to make sure that you take care not to make bark scars. So you want to try to keep all the bark intact if possible. And then, on the other side, you'll see here, when the tree is alive in the growing season, when it's non-dormant, is not a great time to be doing this. A lot of the energy is in the leaves. And this graphic here sort of depicts what's called xylem, and that's the movement of nutrients and sap, up the tree in the spring as it gets warmer, and then down the tree into the roots in the winter as it goes dormant. And we're sort of trying to catch that window of the nutrient movement, because that's what the mushrooms will eat. One more thing, we've had years where we've had big ice storms, and that's also just a big opportunity to inoculate mushrooms. I think there was one a couple years ago. The trees fall down or limbs fall down in the winter. They can just sit there until it gets towards the end of winter, and then you can go ahead and inoculate those. What were you going to say?
If you don't have access to a forest, your local tree service, it's a great contact to have. It could be hard to identify. The types of wood that you exactly want, but if you have a good relationship with your local tree server, it could be a great ally into sourcing logs. Wood chips is another good alternative that you could use. You just make sure you get green wood chips, so they still have all those starches. Once they dry out and start decomposing, they still have some starches that the mushroom will be able to consume, but it just won't produce as much.
Any questions? I saw a couple back there. Yeah.
Oh, hold on. Let me take this. We're recording this, so let's have you. Who had a question? Okay, we'll start on this row and we'll work it back.
Hey, when you cut down the tree, do you go ahead and chop it up into your pieces, or do you wait until you go to inoculate the tree?
When we cut down the tree, we let it sit for 10 days to 2 weeks, because that antifungal response that happens will sort of pass. If you inoculate right afterwards, you're just decreasing your chances of getting a good flush. So we'll cut it down. We'll just cut it down and leave it where it falls for that period of time. And then after that 2 weeks or whatever, then we'll go and take the limbs off and cut it into, we usually use about 4-foot sections. That one's a bit short that we'll be working on today than we usually use, but something like that, just whatever you can manage to move around. It could be 2-foot sections if that's what you want. Right?
When you're talking about taking down trees that are 4 to 8 inches in diameter, what about limbs off of larger trees? Can you use the limbs?
Yep. Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah. You'll just want to make sure you do it at the same time scale as we're talking about here.
And the diameter of the trees it just means, so a log will produce as many years as inches, approximately. So, a smaller log will just produce for less years.
Right, yeah, a bigger log will produce mushrooms for longer. Usually it's about a year per inch. So for example, a 6-year-old tree, no, a 6-inch tree diameter will produce for 6 years, roughly, right? Depends on the species, the mushroom you're inoculating.
When you're using wood chips, do you find that you have to artificially hydrate it? And do you see that the increased surface area tends to dehydrate it faster?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are inoculating wood chips, it's probably going to be wine cap or King Stropharia that you're going to be growing. It's a great mushroom. It just grows like crazy. But yeah, so if you spread the wood chips 2 inches thick over a big area, it's going to be a lot harder to get the mycorrhiza to take. Whereas if you make a pile that's a couple feet in diameter, that's waist height, that's going to hold a lot more of its moisture, right? Yeah.
Do you find that the wood chips contaminate faster?
Yeah, it's hard to not get contamination, but again, you're just trying to work on a scale. So I'm usually trying to get at least a 5.5 pound bag or two into a big pile of wood chips, and I try to put it right in the middle to sort of get the spawn to take. And then you'll notice when it takes, and then once it does take in that pile, then you can move that to where you want to actually plant the.
So you can take like some wood chips that already have mycelium growing them and move them to a different wood pile, and it'll inoculate that wood pile as well.
Yeah, that's kind of what you want to do. Yeah, because again, if you get a bag of spawn from Field and Forest, say, that's going to be grown in a sterile environment, and it's going to take a while for that to take in your pile of wood chips, for example, right? So once they do take in the wood chips, you're going to have a lot easier time moving them around because they're adapted to their natural environment wherever you are. Yeah.
You mentioned that you're going to go over the best species in another slide, but
Yeah.
Is there any do not do's? For example, we have access to 100 acres of tops from foresters who just came through, and there's a lot of 6-inch branches in there, but is there anything I want to not use, considering they've already been down for a year to a year and a half?
If they're down, well, first of all, black walnut's a species that doesn't really enjoy fungi very much. Besides that, even pines and cedars, there are species that will grow in those. But if the trees you're speaking about are down for over a year, I would probably avoid doing a lot of work inoculating those because they're probably going to be fairly dried out, as well as probably contaminated with the more opportunistic species. So it's really just deciding how much work you want to put into something that might not work. What we're doing here is sort of giving yourself the best strategy with the work input that you'll be doing.
Mine's kind of tie in that question. How long after something falls? You mentioned like winter storm damage. How long would you maximum go before, you say that's too far to inoculate trees?
Over the winter?
I'm just saying. So like she's saying, she had materials almost a year old, but like 3 months, 6 months, 1 month? I mean, what's our maximum time?
Yeah.
I would say that depends on the temperature on that winter. So if it's a sunny winter, it will probably dry out faster. But before you inoculate, you want to make sure the tree still has some greenery in it. So a good way to identify that is to peel some of the bark out and see if it's still green or not. If the wood is completely dried out, the chances are that your success will be lower.
But usually over the winter, the winters are fairly short here. Usually if a tree falls in the winter and stays whole, it's probably going to be good to inoculate even a couple months later. The winters are cold enough and wet enough here. Yeah. Okay, next slide. Again, this is from Field and Forest, and this is sort of your species diagram. You'll see, it takes a lot to depict But essentially, you've got mushroom species with tree species, right? And then the stars, the blue stars are kind of what you're looking for. Those are the ideal matches. But just to give you some perspective, we took a kind of a small risk inoculating shiitake on beach, which is mostly what we did with that first NRCS grant. And you'll see shiitake on beach is kind of right up at the top of this column, and it's got the green square, which is recommended, but it's not superior. And when we were doing our research for this, we did kind of hear conflicting experience in shiitake growing on beach. Some people said it worked. Some people said it really didn't work. But we are here to say that it does work in our experience. It's actually been great. Our logs are now 5 years old, and we harvested several pounds yesterday morning. So they're still going, we are noticing a lot of decomposition, which is totally natural with what we're doing. And the logs are getting remarkably light, which again is, to me, it's a sign of the fungi eating the nutrients and drying the logs out. But in general, I'll just briefly go over this. Shiitake love oak. Red and white oak, doesn't matter. Shiitake loves hardwood. In opposition to oyster, which loves sort of the soft hardwoods. It loves tulip poplar, which is what we'll be working with today. It loves cottonwood. It loves box elder, all of the softer woods. Lion's mane combtooth love beech, but we've also done them in sugar maple, and it works fine. And then reishi loves sugar maple. And those are the turkey tail. Turkey tail just grows natural here, really. Any questions about this? Yeah. Huh? Hickory trees? Hickory. Yeah, I would do shiitake and hickory. It's a super hardwood. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. Let's see. Let me check the time. Good. We got about an hour left. Okay.
These are some of the mushrooms that we grow. These are pictures from our production. So we grow shiitake mostly on beech, but also in some oak. The hericiums here, combtooth and lion's mane, highly prized in the market today. We grow them on beech, American beech. Reishi on sugar maple, king blue oyster on poplar, and that's what we're going to be doing here today. And then the turkey tail is one that just grows wild. A lot of people have concerns about the turkey tail takeover. I'm also an herbalist, so I know about the amazing benefits of turkey tail, so I'm actually glad to see them taken over, and I let them. Some people take them off to minimize the contamination, but if you have turkey tails growing on your log, might as well just harvest that as well and have 2 crops in one. One that is not on here is the wine cap on the wood chips. This one we use mostly in our garden. So something cool about the wood chips is that you can use it for not only to grow mushrooms, but also as mulch in your paths, so that you just add another crop and another layer of biodiversity into your garden beds. Yeah, mostly the wine caps. Also called King Stropharia.
Around fruit trees, I've actually never inoculated wine cap around fruit trees. It would be interesting to try out, but definitely, adding endomycorrhiza to fruit trees is a good choice. I would imagine it would be good if you get the wood chip layer thick enough so that it takes. Yeah. Okay. All right. We're going to get into some hands-on demonstration inoculation. This is the fun part. I guess we'll move over here. I'll just go over tools here quickly and what we're going to be trying to do here. This is an angle grinder. Usually it's used to cut metal with like a disc that goes on here, right? But Field and Forest sells these bit adapters, which have a stop on them. So essentially it's 12 millimeter bit adapter, so you can, it's just so easy and so quick. Alternatively, they have the same bit adapters for drills. Drills rotate at a substantially slower rate than an angle grinder, so this is a lot slower. You'll go through batteries quicker, but it works if all you got is a drill. These bit adapters are not expensive from Field and Forest. So this is what we're going to be drilling with. Here is our spawn. This is just left over from autumn. I kept it in the fridge over winter, and this is exactly what we're looking for. It's really bright white. This is a sign of the mycorrhiza, the mycelium taking. If it was yellow or brown or black or off color, you wouldn't want to use it. But this is the sign of really healthy mycelium. This is golden oyster spawn that we got for Field and Forest. This will go inside the logs. These are the tools that we choose to use from Field and Forest. These are hand palm inoculators. So the hole's drilled. We sort of like get some spawn in here, and then you just hit it in, and it puts the spawn in your log. Once the log is full of spawn, then we've got a mixture of food-grade cheese wax cut with food-grade mineral oil. You could use just cheese wax, but it gets a little bit more expensive that way. The mineral oil just makes it go further for cheaper. And here is, we do about half-half. And here is that mixture melted, ready to go. You just put it on with the paintbrush. So let's inoculate some logs. We got some more back there too, right? You want some safety glasses? Oh, labeling. Just on the ends of usually the log towers, we label the logs. Here we've got a king blue oyster label. Whoop. Metal tags, really easy to use. Sometimes we just cut open pop cans or beer cans and write on them, but we got this fancy labeler thing, so.
Something that lasts and it has a date on, because you will forget when you inoculate the log. It could be helpful.
Do you want to do this, or should I?
I can hold the log.
So how hot does that get? Yeah. I know.
The wax?
Yes. Do you get it to a point where it's sterile, or to prevent?
Well, it melts a really low point. It has a really low melting point. And we use it as a double broiler. You don't want it to burn when it starts to smoke. That's burnt. But it's cheese wax and mineral oil are food grade, and they are pretty sterile. So when you plug the holes, that should keep like any moisture or water or any other mushrooms to go in. But we don't take especially care to like sterilize this. It's just really hot, so we just hold it sterile enough. Yeah.
Right, but that is a good thing to keep into consideration when you are inoculating, is trying to have a sterile environment. I mean, you're going to be outside. We inoculate in the forest, but just small things like keeping your bag closed as much as possible, like not letting inoculated logs just sit out without having the wax on them for many hours at a time. Just stuff like that.
Are you cleaning your drill bit at all, or no?
Sterilizing tools and drill bits is something that you should do between species.
With what?
Not necessarily the drill bits, because the drill bits are you're just drilling in the same wood. But especially like the inoculators, sterilizing these in a rubbing alcohol solution or something like this is a good idea. And also, there's only so much you can do outside. If we're starting to talk about indoor growing, then it's a whole other ballgame, and it's extra important. You sort of risk your whole operation.
Then you really want to use gloves, protective, leave your shoes outside, not like really minimize all the contaminants as possible. Because this is a really low tech and like low input production. If you do it indoors, it's like a lot more cost and a lot more work and energy.
Oh, you need the microphone.
Oh, sorry.
Whoops. I'm not used to microphones.
Is there any concerns about like selling it, not being from a sterile environment? So if like I take it to the farmer's market and sell it, do you understand what I'm saying? Like, I don't need to worry about.
I think it's your regulation.
There is not a lot of regulations to sell mushrooms in the farmer's market. If you have, like, if you inoculate a shiitake and you have a shiitake come out, then that's good enough for them.
Yeah, in our experience, farmers markets will not let you sell wild forage mushrooms no matter what. But if you can prove that you cultivated and grew the mushrooms, then you're good to go. Yeah. Hold on, let's get up. Yeah.
The bag that you held up earlier, that's something that you cultivated yourself, right? Yes. What if you don't have refrigeration? Could you maybe do that, say, in a controlled environment that's, say, a cave at 55 degrees naturally in the dark all the time?
Yes. Yeah. We didn't cultivate.
My mother used to bring.
We didn't cultivate this ourselves. We got this from Field and Forest. But if you have even a small, I think they have these like sterile bubbles that you can get now. You can, if you want to experiment with sort of making your own spawn from liquid culture and agar and sort of the laboratory thing, you can totally do that. And then once you have this, the refrigeration is really only a means of keeping it for months and months, right? The whole process isn't done under refrigeration. So, yeah.
Our success with this has always been using, so you'll get your substrate, and then we like to use mason jars to sterilize.
Mm-hmm.
We're not very successful with the bags. I guess we're just not there yet. It
Yeah.
helps, but you want to get it to that temperature to sterilize your substrate, and then you can inoculate, and really, they'll do all the work.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
You have a question here?
Is it on? It is on. Predators, we have a huge deer population, something eating them while they're outside.
We've had issues actually with woodpeckers more than anything, because the holes that we leave on the logs really look like someone did that for them. And they just like to go in there and pull the mycelium out. This is especially important. Well, we've actually only seen this in fall inoculations, I guess, because then we enter the winter season where there's maybe less food available, so they go and target our logs. What we've done to prevent that is cover the logs either with leaves or agribon or some kind of landscaping fabric, just until the mycelium establishes in the log, and you will see that when it starts staining white, the sides of your log. And then you can remove that protection. We've seen some slug damage and some deer damage. They like to munch on some of the mushrooms. Not enough for us to do something about it, thankfully. And then there is a variety of fruit flies and mushroom maggots that like, especially oyster mushrooms more than anything else. The shiitakes seem to be really a really strong crop. Like, nothing seems to really destroy them. Again, we might just be lucky in our site. Some other people might not be so lucky, but yeah. In our experience, it's been mostly woodpeckers.
I have ravens and crows, so I had to put very
Yeah.
Yeah, the animals,
Netting.
the wildlife know what's good, you know? Like, we're not the only ones that like mushrooms. We did want to mention harvesting.
Mm-hmm.
Along with pest pressure, you know, harvesting techniques are pretty important to us. We use scissors or knives scissors is ideal to sort of like, you know, cut the stem. We don't really enjoy harvesting by hand. It feels like we're pulling a plant up by its roots if we pull the mushroom sort of like out of its hole. They will fruit all over the log, not just out of the holes that you drill. They come out the ends, they come everywhere. And then, ideally, especially with shiitakes, you want to harvest them shortly after the veil breaks. As the mushroom opens, it has this white thin veil that's under the cap. And once that opens, it's perfect. And then they'll sort of, the cap will curl up, and that's when you're like, you better get them or else they're gonna turn into mush.
And that being said, there are different strains of, especially shiitake. There's cold strain and warm strain, and that means they'll just fruit at different temperatures. So some will fruit more in the spring or in the fall when temperatures warm up. That's a warm shiitake, and when temperatures cool down, that's a cold strain shiitake.
Yeah, and that's the good work that Field and Forest and other people that are experimenting with growing spawn are doing. And once you have that type of environment set up where you can actually take a stem of a mushroom or the soil that it's growing in, or a piece of the wood it's growing in, and propagate it, that's where it gets really exciting. And sort of going back to that earlier slide about the fungi kingdom, like I think there's a lot that we have yet to see about mushrooms, and just the idea that, they're so easily propagated if you got the right environment. They really want to grow. Half hour, great. All right. Should we inoculate?
Yes, do you want me to hold this?
I don't know if you need to hold it. Maybe once it gets on the up on the other side. Okay, here we go. You might get some wood chips. Okay. About 4 to 6 inches is kind of what we go for. Obviously, more holes, more spawn is going to be a quicker spawn run. It's pretty logical. All right. It's really fun. Maybe we'll have time for some people to try, but yeah, the angle grinder with the bit adapter it's just really enjoyable.
How many rows would you do?
Yeah, again, we sort of go for, this is a bit close, but it won't hurt to be close, but we go for a sort of a diamond pattern around the whole log. Some people choose to paint the ends of their logs or even put wax on the ends of the logs just to keep them from drying out. We've never done that, but that's a method that you might want to consider if you're in a drier area or if you have more of like a south or east facing slope. Here, you want a microphone?
Maybe I can't do it with both. Maybe you want to talk about the depth of the setting.
Yeah, so here, I don't know if y'all can see that. Wow. So essentially this has a spring in here, and when you push it out, there's sort of an inside metal piece that pushes out. It has a flathead screw piece on the bottom that if you need to adjust the depth, you can put a screw in here and then twist this, and it's threaded, and it will adjust the depth if you're seeing that you're not getting. You want the spawn to sort of be flush with the bark layer. Otherwise, if you've got half an inch divot in there, it's just going to take a lot more wax, right? So we're shooting for flush with the bark layer. And usually we have like buckets or containers. We've got harnesses that we hook up here that clip on so that we can be sort of hands-free with our spawn on our waist here. And we're really just like It's a really sort of meditation task. You know, you're just like getting the spawn in there. It gets very zen.
And this is a spawn in sawdust, so it's fresh spawn. You can also buy wood plugs, although we feel like this is a lot more. It's a lot better because you can really see like that is alive and moist. The plugs tend to dry out, so sometimes they're just not as efficient. And basically, what this looks like is just a little plug of sawdust that comes out of here.
I don't know if y'all can, yeah, I guess you can see that. That's about a 1/4 inch. And again, like that's fine, but we're usually going over them another time if there's that much there, just because when you put the wax on, which we'll get to, sometimes it has little bubbles, it makes little holes. You want that to be a seal, right? That's just gonna give you a better chance of getting a good flush.
Also, we didn't bring them today, but we usually do this on sawhorses, so it's movable and you don't have to hold it with your hands because they would sit on the wood. We do hands-on workshops, so my tendency is to be like, all right, everyone, come up and try. Maybe we'll have some time. All right, and then last step is to seal the holes. So just come in, just be generous.
Oh, here you go.
Can you say all that again?
Yes.
So just be generous with your wax. Make sure you really cover all the spawn and don't leave any air bubbles. I mean, if you do, it's not the end of the world, but it will just like increase the chance of contamination.
Is it any kind of special paintbrush or
just any paintbrush, yep. Oh, that's it. So as you see, like it solidifies really fast. So by the time you get around the log, it's ready to pick up and store. And this is washable, so don't worry about getting your clothes dirty with it. And then if you have a backyard, that would be the ideal place to put your log, but you can also put this in your house, like in your pantry, in your basement, in your window sill. This is a really great way to just like produce your own mushrooms and save a lot of money on mushrooms.
So where's like a best location?
So best location is a dark, coldish, humid place. So basements are ideal.
If you were going to keep it outside, what would you do? Like, would you do like where you have like a gully that's really covered in trees?
I would put it outside so it is able to catch rain, natural rainfall, or you can water it, like in your garden beds would be fine, but somewhere where it's shady, so under a tree, or under some shrubs that you have. The more contact with the soil, the more water content it will have. If you stand it up, it will likely dry out faster.
Reishi logs like to be partly buried,
Yeah.
which is an interesting tendency. Most of the logs we just stack in like you saw, those kind of like ricks, like those log cabin ricks. There are, in Japan where there's a lot of slope, they sort of do like, they put a log on the downhill and then they put a couple to keep it from rolling down, and they'll build, rick stacks on slopes, which we do as well in our forests. And really any way you can get the logs to stand and have airflow in between them. They do take a little bit of maintenance otherwise. Like if we have a dry summer like we had, or a dry year like we had this year, I was out watering the logs at times, especially the ones that had just been inoculated and hadn't quite done their spawn run yet. And we're kind of still yet, this year was exceptionally dry. We're still kind of yet to see what the effect of that will be. Like usually we get a pretty good flush in the spring and autumn. We really didn't get a full flush until late in the autumn this year. The spring just totally skipped. So we'll see what happens with that. I guess, sorry, the microphone's over here. I'll get that to you quick.
I was just say, you said water in there. How wet are you making the material when you said you had to water it because it's dry?
I really just like with the hose spraying.
Just dampen it?
Yeah, just as much as possible, really. But you know, back in the forest, we don't have access to water back there so much, so it really depends on what you can do. But the ones that I did have easy access to water, I was spraying them down pretty good. Yeah.
You got a question over here?
Are there any like encouragements for or against inoculating like living trees that are still standing?
I wish you could answer questions.
I can answer. I mean, unless you want to kill the tree, but I mean, if you're going to cut it down, I mean, well, let me put it this way. If you're inoculating with parasitical mushrooms, you could do that. If it's a saphotropes, you probably won't have as much as the production.
But inoculating inoculating stumps is a great option. And that's actually, I forgot to mention that when we got the NRCS grant, the NRCS agent at the time wanted us to paint glyphosate or Roundup on all of the stumps that we...
We'll do that organically.
Right. So we were like, yeah, that's it. We politely said we're not going to do that. But we suggested to him that, we're going to inoculate the stumps, and he thought it was a good option. So we actually didn't, the workload got a bit more, and we were running into winter with that. So we didn't inoculate as many stumps as we wanted to, but that does work. And a lot of the trees have resprouted. But yeah, inoculating stumps is great. If you do want to do that, you just want to inoculate as much of the bark area as is above the ground. And then you want to do holes along the outer ring and of the top of the cut surface, inoculate those. And then from what I've heard, stumps take a longer time to fruit, but they will produce for a longer amount of time.
So say you're inoculating multiple species at the same time. Is it okay to stack those in the same stack, or are you risking contamination that way?
It's totally fine to do that. I would suggest labeling your logs so that you know what to expect. And another thing is species fruit at different times. And also they take different times to establish. So shiitakes takes around a year after inoculation for them to start fruiting if the conditions are right. But something like a lion's mane or a comb's tooth will take up to 2 years before they start fruiting. And they will fruit, they're a lot harder, they're like a lot slower mycelium, so they're a lot harder to like keep them alive for that long until they fruit. What we've done before is also just cut down a tree or a tree that fell in a storm, and then we just inoculate the whole tree without cutting it to see how that would differ. But it fruited for like 2 years, and then it didn't fruit anymore. We're not sure why, but it's totally fine to stack them. I mean, there's really not a lot of contamination risk between these species that are like cultivated for culinary uses. It's more like the aggressive stuff, like if you put different types of oysters, there's a chance that they might cross, which could be a cool experience.
Got a question real quick. Thank you guys for being here. Really enjoying this talk. So as far as buying your spawn and your wax, let's say I was inoculating 50 logs, right, like you usually do. How much wax and spawn do you usually buy?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's some questions over, yeah, thanks, Tony. So we've seen that, let's see, for field and forest, we get 5.5 pound bags of spawn. I think they're like $25 each. And then we've noticed that 5.5 pound bag will do between like 30 and 40 logs. Obviously, it depends on the diameter. But yeah, we're getting around 35 logs per bag of spawn. For the wax, that's a lot harder to gauge. Usually we're buying like, 1 pound blocks of wax, and then whatever this is, a liter, what is this? Couple liters at a time, and that'll last for at least 100 logs, several hundred logs. It goes fairly far, but you don't want to be you want to be generous with it as well.
Can you reuse that wax after you've melted it?
Yep.
You can let it harden and then melt it
The-
and reuse it?
We do, and we haven't noticed any detrimental effects yet.
You can also use beeswax if you have access to beeswax. But you just want to make sure you break it with some oil to make it more flexible.
Yeah.
Awesome presentation, guys.
Hey.
And I was wondering, have you heard of anybody using like the wild Bradford pears or Caliana pears, like inoculating those? You know, they're problematic invasive.
That's a good question. That's a great question. Fruit trees, I don't know. I haven't heard of people doing that. I would imagine it would work. I would imagine it would work. Yeah, I would probably try an oyster to start out with, just because it's easier to grow. It's a fairly soft wood, right? Yes. Yeah. I would try oyster, and I don't see why it wouldn't work.
Okay.
A couple more questions in the middle there.
Yep. A quick tip that we use on our wax, we went to a thrift shop and bought the little pot, crock pot that you do the aroma stuff in.
Yeah.
You know, it only holds about a teacup full. So, you know, if we're doing several logs in a day, we just keep adding to it a little longer. If we do a few, then unplug it and start back next time.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Crock pot for melting wax. We're usually out in the forest, so we use that double broiler system, which is the same thing as a crock pot. And if you have electricity, that's a great option. Thanks.
Yeah, we usually just make a little fire, and we have a little tripod where we set our wax to melt. It's part of the experience.
It's really enjoyable. Yeah, come try it out. Yeah. Out in the forest in the autumn. Yeah.
We tend to walk to our logs to harvest them rather than walk the logs to us, because it's a lot less work.
Yeah, I carried as many logs as I cared to after that grant around the forest, up and down slopes. It was, yeah. Any other questions? There's one way over there. You're going to get your exercise today, Tony.
Will you say one more time where to do the stump? So you said
All around the, when you are inoculating a stump, you want to do all around where the bark is exposed, above ground, and then also on the top, around the rim, because that's where the highest content of sugars are located.
Excuse me.
Hello?
Hey.
How far into the logs do you recommend drilling?
So if you're using this bit adapter that Field and Forest sells, it's got a stopper on it. And I would say this is about 1 inch. Really what you're going for is getting underneath the cambium layer of the trees, which is essentially just directly under the bark layer. That's sort of where the first initial spawn run will happen. And like Joana said, you'll see sort of around the outside of the ends of your logs, sort of a bright a white shading. And that's the sign of a good spawn run.
How long will the spawn last, like if you don't use a whole bag at one time? If you keep it cold?
How long will the spawn last? Usually, in our experience, it's been a year is pushing it. Really, you want fresh spawn, but really, you can tell if it's viable or not just by looking at it. Like this will start to get sort of like like liquid in the bottom, and it'll start to turn kind of like off color and yellow, and that's the sign of it starting to become not viable anymore. But when I took this out of the fridge from October, I mean it's bright white, and it had you can see it started to creep up the bag, and that's just mycelium spreading. It's great.
And you see there's still a lot of sawdust there. It means that there's still some food. Basically, the mycelium will last until it has stuff to eat. What we've done accidentally in the past is with leftover spawn, there was just some holes in the bag, and then it actually started growing mushrooms straight out of the bag. So that's something you could do too if you have leftover spawn and don't have any more logs. But once it has no more food, it will start going bad and it will die off if you don't use it.
Yeah, and again, there's so much room for experimentation, like especially with oyster spawn. You know, if you've got this much left over after you inoculate, get a bunch of cardboard, soak it, make layers of cardboard and spawn sandwiches, and then you'll have just a bunch more spawn, and you can do whatever you want with it. You can, you know, put it in a pile of sterilized straw, or, you know, it's really fun playing around with mushrooms. So.
Or old jeans.
Or old clothing, you know. You can give your clothing to Goodwill, or you can grow mushrooms in it.
A quick question regarding the cardboard. Can you just use regular or corrugated with the glue? Will that affect it negatively, or doesn't matter?
So in our experience with cardboard, you're really just trying to get the most surface area. So especially oyster mushrooms don't really care about glue or tape or anything. What you do want to try to do is sort of like tear the cardboard. There's a corrugated layer in the middle usually. You kind of want to try to expose that by tearing it in part like length, width-wise, I guess it would be, just to expose that surface area, and then make sure it's really wet. But besides that, yeah, not really.
I would definitely say that choosing cardboard that has like not a bunch of what is it?
You don't want gloss.
Glossy ink on it.
Or wax.
Yeah.
None of that.
I mean, the cardboard does have glue, regardless, but at least minimizing the chemical. Yeah.
What about storage? Like, how long do they last? Can you?
The mushrooms?
Yeah.
Okay. Especially with. Do you want to answer this one?
It depends of the type of mushroom. So the ones with the best shelf life are the shiitakes, because they're really hardy and dense. They could last up to 4 weeks in the fridge. You want to definitely store them in a paper bag or a double paper bag, not in plastic, so they can still breathe. Oysters have a shorter shelf life. After a week, they start to get moldy and other things start growing on it. But yeah, it really depends from mushroom to mushroom. Usually the hardier ones last for longer. And paper bags has been, like, for us, like the best way to store it.
Yeah, and especially with outdoor cultivation, really depends on how much it's been raining. If you harvest any mushrooms right after it rained and they're wet, they're going to be heavy, they're going to decompose faster. Whereas like sometimes in these dry years, we'll harvest shiitakes and they're pretty much dried in the log. and those will stay a long time. You know, hardier mushrooms like reishi especially, those will last a long time with really no care. And then, yeah, what we do with surplus mushrooms is we'll oftentimes dehydrate them. Yeah, and you know, those last for until you use them, really. It's a great way to preserve them.
That reminds me, we have one more slide to show you. So we, obviously we sell the mushrooms fresh to local chefs in the area. But also I have an apothecary shop where I produce botanical products with the herbs and mushrooms that we grow. So we sell them fresh. We also dry them because that's really the best way to store mushrooms for long term. And then with the powders, we do hot cacao, mushroom seasonings. I also do mushroom tinctures. And we have also a street food business that we do yearly and where we use a lot of our dried stuff. So these are value-added products that, you know, just add another layer of income to this stream. Apart from this, we also have a small fruit tree nursery and the apothecary shop, yeah, with other botanical products. But there's a lot of creativity that could go into what to do with mushrooms. It's not just fresh, yeah.
Yeah, and then like I mentioned earlier, we talked with one of our wasabi grower friends recently, and growing outdoors is not a get-rich-quickly thing. It's more of a get poor slowly scheme. So, yeah, it's good to have fresh mushrooms. That's really it.
Farm life, as you know.
Yeah. Farm life, yeah.
You've talked about wetting the logs. At what stage and how often should you do that? And I've also read about soaking the logs to force production.
Yeah, we don't have much experience with soaking logs to force fruit. But it definitely works. And then you can speak more on that a little bit, maybe.
Sure.
Yeah.
The reason why we don't do it is because of the location of our logs. We don't have water accessible, and also it's just a lot of extra hauling. But what you could do is soak the log once the mycelium is completely established in the log. You can soak it for 24 hours, not really more than 24 hours is not advised. And then within 5 to 14 days after, you can expect a flush. What is called a flush is when the whole log fruits with mushrooms. And then you want to kind of give it a break for 4 to 8 weeks before you do another flush, another soaking. So what people do is they have either like a tarp pool or a kiddie pool or their canoe that they fill up with water, and then they just literally dump the logs in there and submerge them. If you have a creek, you could do that too. Just, you know, be careful that they don't get washed away. But it is a lot of work to soak the logs.
Yeah.
The watering with a hose, it's more that you ensure that they would fruit fully when they're ready. It doesn't really force the fruiting, but it just ensures that they will fruit properly and they won't dry up.
Yes. Yeah, we've got a website that we launched earlier last year. That's it. Email.
We're just south of Berea, Kentucky.
Yeah, it's an old post office town called Disputana.
10 minutes?
10 minutes. There was
question, can you speak of like things that cause failures? Like letting things get too dry, or like you mentioned contamination or anything, but is there failures you've experienced in your time doing this?
Yeah.
On the mushroom aspect? Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
There's a lot of other crops that they grow.
Probably contamination from other mushrooms is the hardest one to control. I mean, there's just nothing to do. They're propagated by spores. You know, there's one. We have like 6 or 7 stations throughout our woods, and one of them that I did a couple years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, is full of turkey tail and other things, but it really hasn't produced much shiitake yet. And it's hard to tell why, you know, like.
Well, by suspicion, that is also a station that has lion's mane, which is a very slow-growing mycelium. So the turkey tail is a lot more aggressive, so it just kind of like opportunistically took over and killed the other, probably consumed the other mycelium. There's also a lot of other polypores mushrooms that took over that one station. And part of the reason could have been that the wood was already infestated before we, you know, the mycelium was probably already present in the wood when we harvested, and we just didn't know, we didn't see it. And then the other failure was the woodpecker thing, because they really destroyed like the whole inoculation of that season. Most of the logs were completely the holes were completely empty.
Yeah.
But you know, it's part of this is also giving back to the forest. So it was just that one time.
We've got a whole slew of questions right here.
Okay.
So I just had 2 questions actually. What are your favorite strains of shiitake that you're growing?
There's one called Jupiter that I've fallen in love with. It's sort of a giant,
big.
Dinner plate shiitakes.
Yeah.
Besides that,
Black Pearl is a good one too.
Yeah. Lion's mane is a really fun mushroom to grow. It's more difficult than shiitake or definitely oyster. But if you can get a nice lion's mane to grow, it's really, really satisfying. And it's one of the most exciting mushrooms for medicinal purposes. Yeah.
You ever had any experience with chicken in the woods, cultivating it?
We haven't tried. That's sort of like advanced level, yeah. But we're actually going to try maitake soon. We've heard that growing maitake in stumps it works really well. I mean, naturally they grow at the base of red oak trees, so it's kind of unclear if they're a parasite or a saprotroph. But a lot of those categories overlap as well. They're not in the box.
I wondered, I thought I heard you say something took a year to grow, but shiitakes are faster. What is a good mushroom to grow that's less than a year?
Oysters.
So oyster mushrooms would most likely fruit like 6 months after you inoculate. Although every mushroom, the first time they fruit will be a small fruition, and then as they progress, they will fruit more and more. Shiitakes will take about 12 months to start producing, and then the hericiums, or lion's mane, combs tooth, will take sometimes up to 2 years or more.
A lot of those have taken 1.5 years in our forest, and it's that sort of first initial small fruiting at 1.5 years, and then at the 2 or 2.5 year mark is when they'll start to go. But yeah, it takes a lot of patience for sure.
And then after that, you really don't have to do anything besides wait and go check on them when time is right.
Thanks for this. This has been a really, really good workshop. I really appreciate it. My question is, in a commercial context, the market demand for more mushroom producers. What's yours and maybe a couple other folks in the room opinion on that kind of need? Yeah, that's a good point, and I did want to touch a bit on the economics of it and the demand. Astronomical, and growing. It depends where you are. We're currently consulting with the grower in Nashville that grows about 800 pounds a week indoors, and he can't supply the restaurants there. In Cincinnati, we really haven't found many people doing it, which is really interesting. And then in our area too, there's a small-scale producer that are our friends out of Josh and Shannon at Mountain House Mushrooms. They're grown for restaurants, but really we're sort of really hard part-time in the restaurant industry, and we see a huge demand for a steady supply of culinary gourmet mushrooms, and they are not getting what they're asking for. So yeah, it's the demand is high.
We got 2 more questions right over in this area.
How are you drying your mushrooms?
Drying? We've got like a 10 level commercial dehydrator.
Stainless steel.
You could probably, if you wanted to take the time to build a solar dehydrator or something, that would work as well. But usually, depending on the moisture levels, takes about 6 to 8 hours to dry, usually 1 pound or 2 pounds of mushrooms. Yeah.
Have you experimented at all with collecting genetic samples from around your farm, like especially prolific, are doing very well, and cloning them and seeing how well you can inoculate logs that way? And if so, have you gotten any good results from it?
We haven't. That's this year. Okay. Yeah, we're going to start doing that this year, hopefully if things go as planned. We have heard our friends at Mountain House collecting samples from our friend Tim Hensley, specifically a shiitake that they found on pine, which is really interesting. So we've inoculated quite a number of logs with that strain of shiitake on pine, and we'll let y'all know how it does.
Well, we're running out of time right now, so if you want to wrap up, and I've got a few statements here to make at the end, so thank you very much.
Yeah, this has been really, really enjoyable. We're going to be announcing workshops for the spring here in the next couple of weeks. I think I'll be doing a grafting workshop, sort of just intro to grafting, and then I think we'll probably do a mushroom inoculation workshop. And then, yes, please stay in touch with us. We love talking with people and talking with other farmers. I see a lot of friends in the audience here. And so there's our email. If you want, we've got a couple business cards if you want those, but website, email, reach out.
You can also find our farm on the Oak Farm Directory and all our offerings there, including a herbal CSA. So just check it out.
Just to let everybody know that this is being taped, so this will be available. So if you missed some information, It's sort of like drinking from a fire hose today. There's a lot going out, a lot of questions. You may not have got that all. So definitely at the Oak website, this will be put up there so you can go back and review that. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that, you know, depending on your market and everything, you can get them certified organic. It would just be a matter of being aware of who is your ACA, your accredited certifying agency, and what they would accept or not accept as far as using for an inoculant, using for your wax. It's always good to have that conversation. I'm a transition trainer for Oak. I go out and I work with a lot of different farmers. I've yet to work with an organic mushroom farmer. So please, somebody, say they need some help from Oak. I'd love it. It'd be great learning. And I believe there's a good demand. Like he was saying, I know mushroom demand is huge all the way around. You just can't keep up with it. And as far as organics, I'm not really sure what the market is, if that's something that's actually needed, but I'm sure we can do it. I know like PCO and I think OFA, they have special programs specifically for like mushrooms. And some of the other ones, ACAs like KDA, I believe they may be folding it into with the crops or wild harvests and stuff like that. But these are good questions to ask when you start out. If you're thinking about it, don't use Roundup to kill anything in your forest. So, but again, thank you both for coming here. And they did a great job.